So my favorite part when going deep on a brand is discovering, wait, this brand is owned by that company? And that's exactly what I got when I studied Megaworld. Like, did you know that McDonald's Philippines is owned by Megaworld? And they also own Resorts World too. And if you're from Iloilo, where I'm from, in Iloilo Business Park, which is owned and is run by Megaworld, I've noticed that there's this massive building at the center of the district with the word Emperador on it. And that's when I found out that Megaworld also owns Emperador, which apparently is the best-selling brand in the Philippines. I also was not aware how big Emperador is. It's apparently the biggest brandy manufacturer in the entire world. Like, so big in fact that they were able to acquire Fundador, the biggest and oldest brandy manufacturer in Spain. I mean, imagine that. A Filipino company owning a Spanish brand. You have to admit, it's pretty symbolic. The look on Dr. Cerizal's face if you witness this. I've already covered the AGILE Corporation and SM, my two most viewed videos, and so today I'm gonna be talking about Megaworld, its parent company Alliance Global, and the story of its founder and one of the richest men in the country, Andrew Tan. My name is Chris Garin and this is Brand Origins. I'm gonna be doing this in two parts. I'll first be talking about Andrew Tan's childhood up until he built Megaworld just to give you a snapshot of the timeline of his life, and then I'll be going deeper into each of the companies that he owns. We go back to 1952. Andrew Lim Tan was born to a poor family living in the Fujian province of China. Now, I don't know what it is about Fujian, but it's made a lot of Filipino billionaires. Remember that Henry C., John Gokongwei Jr. of Robinsons, and even Jollibee's Tony Tan Caktiong, they all came from Fujian. From Fujian, the 4-year-old Andrew and his family moved to Hong Kong, and he shared how they lived in almost unlivable conditions. They lived in a tenement apartment, and he said that 4 families had to share a single bathroom, and that there was one concrete table for the cooking stove that all families had to share. And if that's not bad enough, he shared how even the corridor of the apartment was also leased out to another family. When he reached the age of 16, they decided to migrate to the Philippines, renting out a place in Santa Cruz, Manila. It was there where he finished high school at the Far Eastern University. Now, what his parents had in mind was that he'd get a degree and get a job at a bank, which would mean financial stability. That's not really what Andrew had in mind though, because since then, he knew that he wanted to start a business. He stayed on course and got his degree in business administration major in accounting at the University of the East. What I think makes this even more impressive was he was able to do this while finding ways to financially support himself. Like, he was selling watches, he was doing tutoring, and he was working part-time. The final step was passing the CPA board exam. And after that, fate had led him to work for a company that would kickstart his journey towards becoming a billionaire. He worked for the Taipan Leonard T of Ajinomoto and Union Hitachi. When asked about Andrew Tan, he said that he remembers him as one of his most hardworking employees. Because of all of Andrew Tan's side hustles and frugality, he was able to save enough money and use this capital to partner up in a trading company that imported and sold home appliances in bulk. They were basically supplying appliance stores around the country, which I assume led to him being able to amass substantial capital because this allowed him to make his next move, which honestly was the catalyst that would grow his wealth exponentially. In 1979, he acquired a small distillery company. It was very challenging in the beginning. The company was bleeding money to the point that it almost wiped out everything he had. But 11 years later, this distillery started producing the one brandy that would rule them all, Emperador. This turned things around, and eventually, Emperador became the best-selling brandy in the country. I'm gonna dig a little deeper in Emperador later on. Now that they had a solid capital-generating business on hand, Andrew Tan set his sights on real estate, and this is when Megaworld first enters the picture. Initially, the first projects were residential condominiums in Green Hills. Megaworld's big breakthrough though came when they turned a former textile mill in Libis, Quezon City into Eastwood City, the first of many city-within-a-city projects of Megaworld. Eventually, Megaworld became one of the several companies under Andrew Tan's holding company, the Alliance Global Group. Alliance Global is currently a publicly listed company with Andrew Tan as its chairman, and that's kind of the timeline of his journey from zero to billionaire. But I'm not done yet. I'm gonna talk about the companies that Alliance Global owns, starting with the one we're most familiar with, and that's McDonald's. In the year 1980, George Yang, who I'm sure you guys have seen in a lot of McDonald's commercials recently, started working on bringing McDonald's to the Philippines. At this point, McDonald's already had 5,000 locations and was already dominating the fast food industry in the US. Since the Philippines does not allow majority foreign ownership of a company, George Yang incorporated GACD, or the Golden Arches Development Development Corporation. Less than half of McDonald's Philippines is owned by foreign owners, and the majority is owned by George Yang. Through Golden Arches, George Yang acquired the master franchise rights for McDonald's in the Philippines, getting the exclusive rights to manage the brands here. Although McDonald's was tremendously much bigger than any local fast food brand here in the Philippines, it was not an easy win for the company because of one particular player, Jollibee. In another video that I made, I talked about how 3 years before McDonald's arrived, people were telling Tony Tan Caktiong to give up his dream for Jollibee because McDonald's was about to enter the country, and people were pretty confident that it would crush Jollibee's goal of becoming the #1 fast food chain in the Philippines. But years before McDonald's arrived, Jollibee decided to challenge McDonald's, so it rebranded, launched new products, and opened several branches. This made it really challenging for McDonald's first few years. It's not that McDonald's struggled hard, it's just that McDonald's was expecting to dominate competitors the same way it did in the US. Despite this, McDonald's still did pretty well in the long run. Not as good as Jollibee though, but McDonald's still has a pretty wide network of stores here, and the brand is pretty strong here as well. Around 1991 to 1992, McDonald's started opening branches in the Visayas and Mindanao regions. The first McDonald's branch in Iloilo opened in 1994 at the Atrium Mall. But sadly, this one has recently closed during the pandemic, and I know that a lot of Ilonggos had lots of memories at that place. Fast forward to 2005, remember that before this point, McDonald's was still partially owned by foreign ownership. But by 2005, Alliance Global Inc., the holding company of Andrew Tan, acquired 49% or the remaining stake of McDonald's, which means that in 2005, McDonald's Philippines became 100% Filipino-owned. Knowing that Andrew Tan owns part of McDonald's explains why there's a McDonald's branch here in Megaworld, Iloilo in such a strategic location. I mean, you can't miss it. Now, aside from McDonald's, Andrew Tan also owns another brand, which is also pretty big, and that's Emperador. I'm not sure what made Andrew Tan decide to acquire the distillery in 1979, but once Emperador was released in 1990, it turned out to be one of the best decisions he's made because Emperador isn't only dominating locally, it's actually the best-selling brandy in the world. It was, after all, the Philippines' first brandy label. The business was so good that when the Asian financial crisis happened in 1997 and many companies were wiped out, Emperador was keeping Andrew Tan afloat as it generated crucial cash flow. Emperador is considered as one of the 3 kings of Philippine liquor. Emperador is the #1 brandy in the Philippines, Ramon Ang's Ginebra San Miguel is the #1 gin, and Lucio Tan's Tanduay is the #1 rum. One of the things that made Emperador stand out, aside from its actual taste, is the marketing strategy they're using. Andrew Tan shares how, instead of using provocative commercials featuring half-naked women, Emperador's brand story revolved around the pride of being successful due to one's own determination and hard work. And that's why he insisted that Emperador's endorsers always wear suits and that the product had to have classy packaging. If you've noticed when you go to the wet market or to a sari-sari store, it's easy to find those calendars with women in bikinis. Those are usually from Tanduay and Ginebra San Miguel. Primera Brandy, San Miguel's answer to Emperador's brandy, also has these same calendars. And even in their ads, you will notice this difference. 2008 is reportedly the year when the sales of brandy surpassed the sales of gin and rum in the Philippines, and since then, Emperador has emerged as an unstoppable force. In 2010, they launched Emperador Light, which significantly increased sales, and in 2013, Emperador began its aggressive expansion worldwide, acquiring close to 1,000 hectares of land in Spain for its vineyards. The following year, in 2014, Emperador acquired White and Mackay Limited for 31.7 billion pesos. And what's pretty cool about this is that to acquire White and Mackay, Emperador was able to outbid much bigger companies such as LVMH, Louis Vuitton's mother company. And if you don't know yet, MH stands for Moet Hennessy, one of the biggest champagne and cognac producers in the world. Emperador also outbid Brown-Forman, the makers of Jack Daniel's whiskey. A little background on White and Mackay, well, it's a 178-year-old company based in Glasgow, Scotland, and it is the 5th largest maker of Scotch whiskey in the world. Now at this point, everyone thought that Emperador was as big as they can get, but 2 years later, they went beyond that. In 2015, Emperador acquired Fundador, Spain's largest and oldest brandy manufacturer. Fundador was founded in 1600, and since the 17th century, members of Spain's royal family have long been patrons of the brand. It even came to a point when he granted Fundador the rare privilege of using the Spanish royal coat of arms on its casks. So why did Andrew Tan acquire Fundador? Well, there are 2 reasons. First, 40% of Fundador's production is bought by the Philippines. Emperador also now has access to the technology that Fundador uses, its vineyards, and all its distribution networks. The second reason is more sentimental. When he graduated from college, his father invited friends to celebrate. And to celebrate the occasion, his dad opened a bottle of Fundador. And this memory stayed with him. But never in his wildest dreams could he have ever imagined that someday they'd actually be able to own the Fundador brand. Along with this acquisition, Emperador also spent 11.5 billion pesos to acquire the Torre Espacio, which at the time of completion in 2007 was the tallest structure in Madrid, the capital of Spain. This would eventually be renamed as Torre Emperador. This is definitely the icing on top of the cake. Just thinking about this, not that it changes anything for us Filipinos, and I don't want to make a big deal out of this. Thinking about how hard our heroes fought for freedom during the Philippine Revolution against Spain, the fact that a Filipino company owns one of the tallest structures in the capital of Spain and is now the owner of Fundador, you have to admit that you feel a little bit proud that they were able to do this. Next on the list of brands they own that I didn't know that they own until now is Resorts World Manila. In 2005, as a joint venture with Genting Hong Kong, Alliance Global created Travelers International Hotel Group. This company is the developer and operator of Resorts World Manila, the first and largest integrated resort in the Philippines. Resorts World Manila is basically Andrew Tan's entry into the casino industry. And lastly, Megaworld. Andrew Tan founded Megaworld in 1989, only a year after AGILE Land launched. Megaworld initially started off building residential condominiums in Green Hills, but eventually, Andrew Tan saw an opportunity in developing properties to be leased for offices. Their plan was to create complete districts that had a mix of offices, residential condos, retail, and entertainment spaces. We first see this when they built Eastwood. Eastwood is the perfect example of the whole city within a city project, which they would eventually refer to as townships. Megaworld has built several of these townships across the country, like the Iloilo Business Park, the Upper East in Bacolod, Mactan New Town in Cebu, Davao Park District, and the Boracay New Coast, just to name a few. But before this whole township idea could be perfected though, it had one thing missing: a mall. This is where Andrew Tan's son, Kevin Tan, enters the picture. Kevin Tan is currently the CEO and Vice Chairman of Alliance Global. Since his college days, he has been groomed to take over the family business. He started out selling condos, and after graduating, his dad told him that there's a space that they have yet to explore, and that's retail. Andrew Tan admitted to his son Kevin that when it comes to the mall business, he didn't have any wisdom to pass on to Kevin since he too had no experience in this field. And so he told Kevin Tan that this may be your chance to create your own legacy within the company. Why don't you go and build our lifestyle mall business? The success of Eastwood is the product of this whole experiment, and the reason why they call it lifestyle malls is that the focus of Megaworld's malls are not only for shopping but for entertainment. They have always wanted their malls to look glamorous, have a lot of open spaces, outdoor dining, and just going around Festive Mall here in Iloilo, it's a pretty accurate description. Along with Megaworld is another development company under Alliance Global called Infracorp. Infracorp is basically just their infrastructure development arm. They're developing the SkyTrain project, which is a 1.87-kilometer public transit system. Unsurprisingly, this project connects the Line 3 Guadalupe station in Makati to Uptown Bonifacio, which is a township owned by Megaworld. Now, the last company on this list is something new for Alliance Global. Due to the pandemic, the company has decided to invest more in pandemic-proof businesses. And so in 2020, with an initial budget of around 250 million pesos, Megaworld created AGILE Digital Ventures. This is Megaworld's investment arm that will focus on tech startup investments. Its first startup is called Pickaroo, a grocery and food delivery service app that will be more focused on specially curated premium products. And for this project, Megaworld partnered up with Crystal Gonzalez, the former country chief of Honest Bee Philippines. So yeah, I don't know how they're gonna fare against current players GrabFood and Foodpanda, but it's good that they have someone with experience on their side. And that's about it. That's a story of Andrew Tan, all the brands under Alliance Global, and the origins of Megaworld. If there's a company or topic that you want me to cover next, just comment down below. Help YouTube's algorithm boost my video and reach more people by clicking like, subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing it with your friends. I also have a podcast where I talk about business ideas that you can steal and brand origin stories that you're gonna love. If you want to say hi, find me on Instagram and Twitter.